Christians and they get very, they get sensitive, but it's understandable. But,
Hmm.
from my point of view, I was always looking at Paul as this person who, you know, really confused a lot of things in the Bible. So I wanted to bring that up to you. And I was like, I don't know how she's going to take it, but oh no, I'll bring it up anyways. And you surprisingly were like, I agree with some of it. So I was like, okay, great. Like coming from a Christian, that's awesome that you realize that. And I was like, okay, cool. I have to get her on to talk about it. So we didn't really go in too much depth with that. So this is going to be the first time where I get to see your views and we can have a back and forth on it.
Yeah, I'm
But
excited.
yeah, so for those who don't know, who is Paul and what was his claim? Like what claim did he make in the Bible? And why is he so important?
Right. So from my upbringing in the church, I was always taught that Paul was originally a man named Saul from a town called Tarsus, and that he had had this like supernatural experience with Jesus on the road to Damascus, which he was going there to persecute more of the Christians. That's kind of what he was known for before he converted, was that he was persecuting Christians, that he was sentencing them to death. And it was like a big part of his testimony in the church. So like he had this experience where he was blinded on the road to Damascus, that he heard the voice of Jesus, and he had to go to a man named, I believe, Ananias in order to have his blindness healed. And then he devoted himself to preaching about the death, resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so he wrote a lot of the epistles, like Romans, or at least, there's a lot of argument as to if he wrote all of it,
Right, right.
First and Second Corinthians, there's a lot of discussion about that. But that's what I was taught. And that his doctrines were such a huge part of my understanding of the Christian faith. And as an adult, especially because of what happened last year with my beginning of my deconstruction, because of BLM and all these other things that influenced it, I didn't realize how much more I was taught about Paul's doctrine versus Jesus' actual teachings. So he's a very interesting guy, Paul, but it took me, the whole thing happening last year with George Floyd to really start to look deeper into his teachings. And I started seeing a lot more issues with a lot of his with what he was saying.
So what does he say that conflicts with the Black Lives Matter movement?
It's not just with black. Well,
Or is it just in general? Like, is there
it,
any?
it was it was more to do with what the church was focusing on specifically. They use his teachings on homosexuality, which is actually a mistranslation and was not included in the Bible until like the 60s, to further their agenda against the LGBTQ plus community. And so that definitely started my distrust of like his teachings. And then going into BLM, there was a lot of pastors that were using his teachings to say like, oh, we shouldn't get involved in this. This is like a worldly problem. Our problems are bigger than this. We shouldn't seek it like delved into like, excuses of like, oh, we don't see color, all this other stuff, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it was just like using him as a justification for any of it, whatever they
Yeah, it
could
always
use,
goes back to Paul. Like Paul said this, Paul said that. But the thing
Right,
I've noticed kind of about Paul is he never really quotes what Jesus said. He always goes back to the Old Testament. It's like,
right,
why
right.
does he not quote what Jesus is saying? It kind of seems to me like there's some kind of he wants to separate or make a new kind of religion out of it, his own.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, and
Absolutely. I
that's
agree with
what
that.
I get out of it. So, do you think he actually obviously you don't then, because you don't think he actually did see Jesus on in the road to
I,
Damascus.
I I have doubts about it because like no one else was with him on that trip. No one saw what happened. He could have faked his blindness for all we knew. Um,
Right. So
yeah,
if
I don't
you,
know.
it doesn't it go like if you do see Jesus in his spirit form, you go blind, right? Is that it? How it
Yeah,
goes?
honestly, like it's just such like a weird thing because his experience seems to supersede what the disciples' experiences were with Jesus, and they actually spent time with him. So why is it that Christians today focus so much more on Paul's experience with Jesus versus like all the other disciples?
I think yeah. To me, it seems like because they just like they they attach to his narrative and they want to believe
Mm-hmm.
what he's saying is really true, and they don't really
Yeah.
dive into the Bible as much as they should. They just kind of believe what the pastors are saying at the
Right.
church. Mhm.
Now this was like another part. I don't know if it's the reason or one of the main reasons why the modern church has like really, stuck with his teachings, but I believe I read it like in a couple different places that his teachings, his writings were like all written down before the gospels were, and so that's what
Yeah,
the church was, really starting to be based on, before the disciples even got to, have all their writings put out. So I feel like he definitely has such a huge influence, and it's been there since the beginning, and it's so problematic.
it is. Yeah. Um, has it, but he does talk a lot about the resurrection and that Jesus did die for your sins, right? And all this. So how do
He
you,
does, yeah.
so in that part, you must take that as true, right?
I do, but and I don't know if I said this in our last conversation. I might have said it in like the example of Jesus on the cross with the thief that asked him to remember him when he enters into paradise, and that's what got this thief to go into heaven. Um, I Paul kind of bases his teachings around that it is just belief in that,
Yeah.
and that's enough. And I don't know if I agree with that anymore after like, studying a little bit of like, the differences between Jesus and Paul, because Jesus definitely talked more about like you have to also be a good person, you have to love God and love people. So that includes a lot of, changing your behavior, changing what you normally would have done, like doing
Right.
more good in the world, versus just belief.
Yeah.
So
And it seems
yeah.
like Paul puts a really strong emphasis on abandoning the law and just focusing on faith, everything. But I don't
Hmm.
know, correct me if I'm wrong, but Jesus did he teach to abandon the law or did he teach to keep the law of the Torah and the Jew
he,
like
he
you know
definitely said to keep the law, and I
right.
understand like from a cultural point of view, especially around the topic of circumcision. I know that was like a big argument between Paul and the disciples, like whether the Gentiles who accepted Christianity should get circumcised or not. And I mean, maybe Jesus did mean, you should keep the law regarding to that as well. But I don't, to make it such a point of contention of our faith is just like, why is it like this point? Why do you have to like make this such a big thing when there's so much more important
Yeah,
stuff out
that's
there?
very odd. It was just that was just a starting point, and then he just
Mm-hmm.
um you know he's just trying to change everything to make it where like the law is just not important anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And and he's also trying to influence the Gentiles and the Pharisees all at the same time, and pretty
Mm-hmm.
much lying to both to get them both on his side. And
Right.
for me, from reading the Bible, I never see that Jesus himself is trying to go to the Gentiles. He's always saying that he's sent to the lost sheep, Israel, which is the Jews. So
Right. There's only a couple of instances where he does, like, he talks to the Samaritan woman, and like we don't even know if she's a practicing Jew or not.
okay,
I
is
think there's
that
only
is
like
that the one that asked him to heal her son?
No,
That's someone else.
she's the woman at the well,
Oh,
where
okay.
he kind of calls her out and says like, you've been with a bunch of different guys, and the guy you're staying with now is not your husband.
Oh, wow.
uh,
Damn.
yeah, there's that whole
Like that.
conversation. Yeah, like he just read her, you know.
Oh, Jesus.
Um, right. Yeah, there's that time. I don't know if the thief on the cross was Jewish or not. But yeah, most of the time that he really only spent with the Jewish people. So that is a very interesting point. Paul definitely makes it more about the Gentiles and including Gentiles into Christianity, which that's not necessarily a bad thing, but to like, I don't know, to make it another like such a different thing from what Jesus was doing. Like, why
Yeah.
can't you just do both? I don't know. That's a question that I had. I don't know if there's like an answer to it that I just haven't read about yet, but
Yeah, to me, it's just mass. It's like just deception. He was just trying to
mm-hmm,
pull people away from what Jesus was really teaching about. He's just,
mm-hmm.
it's um, who he actually saw on the road. Did he actually see anybody? Was it like maybe a devil he saw that's telling him
Right,
to do the opposite of what
right.
Jesus was teaching and to deceive all these other people? And just from him having all these arguments with the disciples who were there with Jesus, walking, talking with Jesus, and he's trying to come up there like he knows better than them for some reason.
Yeah, yeah,
And
as if he
just,
knows Jesus better than all of them combined. It's amazing.
exactly. And then I don't know if it was James was telling him
Mm-hmm,
that it's law and the works, and they were having
mm-hmm,
this. So they both can't be right, right? There has to
mm-hmm,
be one of them has to be right. So it's
mm-hmm,
either Paul is deceiving people, or James just doesn't
mm-hmm.
know what he's talking about. And I try to, I'm gonna lean towards the one James's brother, right? Jesus'
Yeah,
brother.
Jesus' brother.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna lean towards him, who's with him most of his life, walking,
Mm-hmm,
talking with Jesus, and that's how I got. So for me, from that point, I'm looking at Paul like
mm-hmm.
a huge deceiver, and I can't understand why the most of the New Testament is filled with his writings and his books. I
Your
think it's
guess is as good as mine. Yeah. I mean, going back to his deception, I was looking back at his own like profession of his origin and like what he studied and who he was, and him saying like, oh, I was born here in like I grew up in Tarsus, but I'm from the city of Jerusalem, and I studied with Gamaliel, even though Gamaliel only taught men who were adults and who were going to be religious leaders. So how could Paul have known this guy unless he grew up in Jerusalem instead of Tarsus?
wow, I
And
didn't even
like,
know that. That's a good point.
yeah, and then to say, oh, I condemned the Christians, but only the Sadducees had that kind of power, for at least from what I was reading. So I thought Paul was a Pharisee. So I don't understand how
Right.
he could have had that kind of power, because that means that he would have to been an elder or on like some kind of high council in order to do that. So that whole section really started to make me like side eye him, like going, well, who are you really? Because now I don't know. It seems like you're saying a bunch of things are contradicting each other.
Right. So why did they make him so important? I mean, okay, I guess they believe his claim that he saw
Yeah,
Jesus.
and I think like reiterating what I said earlier in the fact that his writings were there first before the gospels were,
Oh,
and so
okay.
it had time to infiltrate the Christian community, and for that to be like, oh, this is the real foundation of the church. And it's so much easier, like from an evangelical point of view, to adhere to Paul's teachings because it's so
Yeah.
much more specific than what Jesus was saying. Like to the evangelical, Jesus's teachings are not enough. They're not specific enough. They're not telling us whether we should welcome the LGBTQ plus person or the person of color or not. It doesn't specifically tell us whether like, circumcision is such a big deal or not, and whether you should go to heaven for it or not. Like,
Right. So
but Paul's teachings do all of that. And like people in the evangelical church just they I guess
they
need
and in
that
the way they need it,
specific.
yeah, they do
Yeah.
need it because, like, I mean, like I said before, for us as the Islamic point of view, I guess we
Mm-hmm.
believe that Jesus was just sent for those people So he didn't
Mm-hmm.
have to talk about, he would just talk to those people at that time, trying to convince the
Mm-hmm.
Jews to, be righteous people and all this. So he didn't have to talk about the future and all this stuff because he wasn't meant to talk about that. So I would
Mm-hmm.
get why, uh, you know, Christians, evangelicals would have to adhere to Paul because that's the only source they would have. But as we just talked about, they don't realize how it just doesn't add up. It's just
Mm-hmm.
you can't have it both ways. You can't have it what Jesus said and what Paul said and what the disciples said, and it
Mm-hmm.
all contradict each other, and then have it all in the same book. It creates mass confusion.
It
So
does. It does. And I also found that, Paul's verses are more likely to have been mistranslated than Jesus's actual words. And that seems to be something that the church just is okay with. And that's what they use to further whatever agenda that they have.
yeah.
Um, I mean, yeah, it really, it's so damaging, and it makes Christianity such an exclusive group where you have to behave a certain way, you have to live a certain way in order to even be considered included. Whereas Jesus was like, yeah, like mostly for the Jewish people, that's who he focused on. Very few Gentiles, but it was still the message of love everyone, accept everyone, like that's way more inclusive than what Paul's teachings were.
Do you think the gospel writers were influenced by Paul at all, since Paul came first?